All right. Good morning, everybody. Hey, Betty. Welcome again, my friend, to another Compliance Capers. Here we
Hey,
are in the month of March. Can you believe?
March Madness.
February, March Madness is here now, right? Our favorite basketball season. So happy. Something new. I know we had focused our entire month last month on the month of love, Valentine's Day, right? We tried to string that along from each episode of Compliance Capers, but here we are in March, and we are going to be focusing on the OIG Work Plan. Something I know you and I have utilized in our career for years. And I remember way back in the day when I fell in love, before it was, established more rigorously, more regularly every month, like we have currently. It used to be done like once a year, and it was this large document that would come to you in the email. And I thought it was fantastic time for me to just dig in and read. Do you remember those old days?
Oh, yes. I
Yeah.
have a presentation I do on the OIG, and I actually found one of the old ones. It was like from, I don't know, 90 something. I have a
Yeah.
picture of it, from where it was, and we would all just wait for it to come out and
Mm-hmm.
print it up so you could see what was coming for next year. And
That's
we'd always
right.
say, oh, you can do all your planning and
That's
but yeah, they are on top of it a lot quicker these days because there's just a lot going on from month to month. They had to be more fluid.
Absolutely. I was really happy when that change took effect, right? Because they do tell us that this is kind of a dynamic process, right? And the work that they do between the different departments, the different types of OIG that I know that you'll be talking about. But, I think it's a rather remarkable thing, especially for those of us on the business side, right? On the billing and the coding side of things. There are a lot of reports, always have been, in terms of work plan items that do focus specifically on the work that you and I do every day, right? Especially for specific specialty physicians. And throughout this month, I really wanted our audience to understand that our focus is not just in general talking about what the OIG does for the year. We really wanted to, as the weeks go on in Compliance Capers, focus on issues from the OIG work plans that have been completed, right? So we really wanted to spend some time on a few of those reports as the weeks go by, talking about what issues they actually ended up finding for these various specialty providers and their service lines in terms of billing and coding. So I know I can't wait for the weeks ahead in March Madness here as we talk about the OIG work plan.
Yeah, I think when you look on the OIG site and see the work plan projects that haven't been completed yet, it's one thing to see what they say they're doing or what they say they're looking for. And I know that that's where a lot of people stop and just say, oh, they're looking at this. But I think the meat of stuff is in seeing what they've completed, what they said, what Medicare says back. And, that's really where you can see what you have to watch for in your office. Because if they have something on a project and they study it and really not a lot comes out of it, I mean, they're going to find something or they wouldn't be looking at it. But, with some of the other things, you can really see where, okay, CMS says they're actively going to start auditing on this to get this money back, or they're active, that's where the gold to me in these projects is in the reports when they're finished, not with them telling you we're going to be looking at it.
I agree. That's really well said, right? And I concur. That's exactly why I fell in love with this larger OIG work plan documents, right? When I first started my career years ago, about 14 or so years ago, it was the larger format, right? And that's exactly what I ended up waiting for, right? Was when that final report was actually issued. And I would spend that extra time reading it simply because that's where all their findings are, right? And you're absolutely correct. That's where CMS has the space to review the whole report and agree or disagree, right, with what their findings are or what their next steps should be, like putting edits in place, for example, right? For the most part, they do want to go ahead and recover the monies that the OIG has identified, right? For the most part.
Yeah.
But absolutely true. It is the nuggets, the gold, the wisdom that you find in those greater reports. I do like, and we do talk about the OIG work plan in terms of what they're doing from month to month. On my podcast, Paint the Medical Picture podcast, I do talk about the OIG work plan each and every month. The second Wednesday of the month, I release an episode that talks about the previous month's work plan items in detail, right? And when the actual final closed report is to be expected. And like we saw in years past, it takes a long time to do this comprehensive work, right? So we shouldn't be expecting a report to be closed out in a week. It's going to take about a year expected time frame for the closed work project to be done. The report is issued, it's public, it's on their website. So then we can go ahead and dig deep into that report and see what they ended up finding, right? Based from that snippet that they told us what they're going to be analyzing in that work plan. So, yeah.
And when you look at the reports, it lays out their methodology, which again is just like with the advisory opinion. That's why I like looking at these things too, because it'll say, here's all the legal background, here's the basic, same thing with the work plan. It gives you their methodology, and you can see that how many claims and what the database was that they looked at. So you can see it's not like, oh, well, we just randomly took this one office and looked at 50 records. They're looking at hundreds of records. And sometimes they're looking at different MACs and are naming them in there too, so that they're making sure that it's representative of, the whole country, not just one, thing or what one person is doing. So I think that's really good too, that you can see that. So, it has some teeth. And when you're using it for your practice, when you're showing, the administration or your physicians and saying, we really need to pay attention to this, they did a thorough exam, and here's how many claims they looked at, here's how much money they were talking about. So I think that kind of gives it weight too, that it really is a deep dive when they pick whatever project that they're going to look into.
Exactly right. And I know you wanted to talk to the audience more about, all of the various, departments that are involved, right? It's much more than just the Office of Evaluation and Inspections that we see a lot for the billing and the coding, or the Office of Audit Services, again, for the billing and coding, right? There's much, much more. And I wanted to make sure that I provide the audience with a link here for this type of background information that the OIG work plan is all about, right? And it does go into some detail on the who, right? Who is actually involved in doing this type of work. So I think it's really a good thing.
Yeah, the Office of Inspector General, the first thing, a lot of people, when they think about OIG, they're thinking about it as it's just one body. But as we were discussing prior to, doing today's episode of Compliance Capers, when we were thinking about what we wanted to do next after the advisory opinions, I think the work plan was a logical transition. We're in the OIG arena. But with the OIG, you've got different inspector generals. There's not just one. You have an Office of Inspector General for the Department of Justice. There's an Office of Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services. So, it's a larger body that encompasses many different things. In fact, I think on their site, in the information they give, they said they have over like 1,600 employees for the Office of Inspector General. And it was established back in 1976. And it deals with fraud, waste, and abuse and things for the Medicare and Medicaid programs, but also over 100 other programs that are in the Department of Health and Human Services. So it's not just for our industry, necessarily.
Right, exactly.
There's a lot of other things that they go through and check on. The OIG is the largest Inspector General's office in the federal government. The HHS OIG is. So they're on their site. They say their three main areas are fighting fraud, waste, and abuse, promoting quality, safety, value, and advancing excellence and innovation. They always have to put out there that they're always doing looking for doing great things for everyone. But the HHS OIG, the one that we mainly deal with, I know I put, when I do the Friday Fraudsters thing, a lot of those are from the DOJ, the Department of Justice, but we don't necessarily look to that for guidance and planning and regulations. Usually it's the OIG, the HHS OIG that we're looking at, and that most of the practices will be looking at. But in the HHS OIG, they start to get so many alphabet letters.
So many. It's all these acronyms. I know. We're bombarded with these acronyms in healthcare, right?
but I guess it's better than saying over and over and over again, the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General. So I get it, but so there's actually 6 different units to the HHS OIG. So we have the immediate office of the Inspector General, and that has the Inspector General. That's where he or she resides. Right now we have a she as our HHS OIG. It's Christy Grimm. And it has the Principal Deputy of Inspector General, Chiefs of Staff. It has technical advisors and other staff. So what the immediate office does is it makes the contacts with Congress, because the HHS OIG also does a semi-annual report to Congress on all the things they're finding and how much money they are finding has been wasted or fraudulent activity, all that kind of stuff. So they give the big dollar amounts to Congress twice a year. And after they do that, those reports are online. So you can go and read through those too. And they are pretty interesting. So that's where they also lead the congressional, the media, and the public affairs interaction. So it's kind of like the PR department where the inspector actually works out of. That's the immediate office. That's that unit. And then we have the Office of Management and Policy, which is the OMP, again, more abbreviations and acronyms. They formulate and execute the OIG's budget. They develop policy. They manage information technology. They have the human resources aspect in there, executive resources, procurement activities, and the physical space of where the OIG operates. Our third one is the Office of Evaluation and Inspection, or the OEI. And giving these abbreviations, it's good to understand that, because when we look on the work plan projects, it will show you which division it's coming out of. So if you see something that says OMP dash something or OEI, now you'll know which unit of the OIG they're talking about. So when you look at that and then look at what the project is about, then that makes sense as to what unit it's coming out of. So you can kind of match that stuff up. So the OEI conducts evaluations of the HHS programs, operations, and processes. They look for the vulnerabilities. They make recommendations for corrective actions. They also have preventative measures. They detect fraud and abuse, and they promote efficiency and effectiveness in the HHS programs. So that's where they're actually doing a lot of the fraud evaluations from. Then they had the counsel. So they had the Office of Counsel to the Inspector General, which is the OCIG, and that is the legal advisor to the Inspector General. And we have the Office of Audit Services is our fifth one, the OAS, and they oversee the audits. So it does the priorities, it performs some audits, it oversees the progress, it coordinates them with the other stakeholders that are involved in the audit. So, maybe in coordinating with the DOJ, if there is something criminal where they're being pulled in, recommends changes for policies and regulations, and improvements for the programs and their operations. And then they create the reports and the audits on the audit impacts. And the sixth one is the Office of Investigation. Now, these guys, the OI, that's the one that we don't want to ever see anything from. That is the one that takes over if they're looking at criminal, civil, or administrative investigations for the fraud, waste, and abuse. So those are the guys that are going to, after the other guys evaluate everything and do everything, the OI is the one that brings the hammer down. So those are the ones that you don't want to have knocking on your door. So those are the 6 units for the OIG, and they all have their own pieces of what they do to come together to investigate fraud, waste, and abuse, or look for it, or look for purported, or what may be, so anytime they see that something's getting utilized a lot, or, claims are coming in a lot for something, things that get on their radar, then they open up what they call a work plan project. And that's the things that we see that we're going to be talking about. They call them projects on the work plan. So they'll open up a project for something and investigate, and then it gets headed off to whichever one of the units, best fits for that project. And then they do their investigations. And so that's kind of how the OIG works and splits up its stuff. So I hope that's they look for what they're going to pick. As I was saying, for the programs, they look at whatever they feel needs the most attention by mandatory requirements. Some things are mandated by regulation that they have to look at this every so often. So that's how they'll do a project, or they get requests from Congress. Somebody will say, hey, we think that this kind of fraud is becoming rampant in this sector, so we would like y'all to look at it. The HHS itself, somebody in the administration there says they think something warrants them to investigate. The Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, that we see a lot in the stuff when they put it out, sometimes they will say, hey, we're noticing budget increases in this one area are just through the roof. We need this investigated. They also look at the work performed, by the other oversight organizations. So they'll see what they're doing, and are they finding something somewhere, and how it maybe connects over into our sector, so that they can look at something or need to look at something. They look at the management actions for the OIG recommendations and what else that might lead to, and whatever they think might have the best impact, where they can find the best things, or what they think might be affecting society as a whole, or the field as a whole. Like, there might be something that people are saying is a problem, but maybe it affects 0.2% of the healthcare field. So they'll say, well, that might be, but we see something over here too, and that's like 50% of the healthcare field is affected by this. We're going to go look at that one first. So they make their priorities by all of those different kinds of things when they are looking at what kind of projects to work on, because obviously there's only so many things they can do at once. because it takes a lot of people to do these investigations and the audits and, then put together the reports and findings. So there's only so much they can do. So that's kind of how they choose. That's how we see the OIG out in the units. And that's kind of just the basic background on what OIG does.
Fantastic, Betty. I think you provided the audience with a really great snapshot, right, of the complexities that are involved with the OIG work plan, right? There's so much that they have to do that is based on the regs, right? They have to do it each and every year, based on federal regulations. So if you do take the time, like we have over these years, you will see a lot of similar issues that come up time and time again, year after year. Again, that's simply based on those are items that they have to look at more deeply versus the others where they do see that excessive fraud, waste, and abuse potential for certain services. So then they have to dig deeper and put that on their project. So I think you really explain that really, really well and comprehensively to the audience. And you definitely disclose that there are a lot of people involved, right, who are employed with these various arms of the Office of Inspector General, right? So it's rather large, and this is why things take time, right, to do these types of reports comprehensively. Because they are not just simple. Well, they do provide a brief report, which is literally 2 to 3 pages. It's brief. But then the comprehensive, which is what you and I love to dig into, is much larger. More often than not, it's over 25 pages, Yeah. So it really does become comprehensive, and the findings are fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing with us the information on the background of what these OIG work plans are. Now, before we leave our session today, I wanted to really touch briefly on a report that I know you and I were expecting to see the results from quite a while ago. I know it was revised at some point in time, and it's not quite finished yet. The expected date for it is sometime this year in 2024. But I really wanted to remind the audience again, because this is a hot button issue, the modifier 25, right? And I know you and I work a lot in evaluation and management space with the modifier 25, and you and I work a lot in dermatology. So there is this outstanding report that we're still expecting on evaluation and management services, again, billed with these minor surgical procedures that affect dermatology specialists specifically. So I'm not sure, right, when the final report is actually going to be issued. But I wanted to put a link to it here for the audience to go ahead and review on their own time. But in general, they give a really large percent on this brief work plan item that they wanted to review, right? Dermatologist claims for evaluation and management services on the same day as minor surgical procedures. So if you read down towards the bottom of the lengthy paragraph of what they're doing this for, it says, quote, in 2019, about 56% of dermatologist claims with an E&M service also included minor surgical procedures, such as lesion removals, destructions, and biopsies on the same day. And it goes on to say this may indicate abuse whereby the provider used modifier 25 to bill Medicare for a significant and separately identifiable E&M service when only a minor surgical procedure and related pre-op and post-op service is supported, end quote. So, for something like that. The Modifier 25 in 2023 was huge. It's been huge. It's been on the OIG Work Plan since decades ago, right? It was the first time it came out with a really lengthy report on the abuse of Modifier 25. Nothing much has changed in today's times, sadly. I know you and I provide a lot of education together separately with our own clients in terms of, what we expect to see in documentation, right? To really support that significant and separate service, that E&M, right? It really does have to be documented so that it is, mirroring something that is separate and distinct from that minor surgery. So I know I can't wait to see what they found out, because that number, right, 56% is huge, right? It's rather big, alarming number. And then again, like I stated in that quote, it's just the general statement of, was there something separately done, or was it just the shave biopsy? Was it just the lesion destruction, right? We don't know here because we're not looking at the records, but in terms of what you and I have seen on our own, there are ways to improve documentation to help support that separate and significant service. But again, this was before the new overhaul of guidelines. So let's keep that in mind as well. This was before. Yeah. So things will be based on 1995 and 1997 guidelines when the OIG and their people in the background are reviewing records, right? It'll be based on the other guidelines, not today's overhaul since 2021.
And that's a shame.
And that's a shame. Yeah.
But I think with derm, it's one of those specialties, like orthopedics, is one of those specialties where they use Modifier 25 a lot, and they use it validly a lot.
Yes.
So the 56% figure that they gave, I mean, yes, it's high, but to me, I wasn't really surprised. Because when, patients go into the dermatologist, it's one of those specialties where you go, but you don't want to go, and you only want to go once. And so when you get in there, they're like, oh, well, I have an AKs, and I also have ISKs, and I also have, they want you to do 20 procedures on them during that visit, because they don't want to come back.
You don't want to come back.
So it is one of those specialties that lends itself to Modifier 25 usage a lot. But unfortunately, as both of us also know, with a lot of our clients, they're doing the service and they're doing a significant and separately identifiable service, but they're not documenting to support that. So I think that's going to be the only part that I get kind of the butterflies about, is not that the 56%, like there's no way. There definitely is a way for dermatology. I was just like, but it's the support. I know they're doing the services, at least, my clients, when I'm working with them, most of the doctors and APPs, they're actually doing the separating them. It's just that their documentation just doesn't support it. So I'm hoping, as we continue working with people and talking about things, and those of y'all in practices that have that task are constantly working with them about showing their work. If you think it, ink it, make sure it gets down, right? So that it's supporting it, because it's all about the support. So that's what I worry about, is their documentation, and kind of like what this is going to purport, because if they come back and say that, out of this 56%, when they were looking at records, they either, and the one that always gets me on this report to Congress they put out is the no documentation, that we asked them and they didn't send us anything. I'm like, seriously, y'all, send some, don't send like some, not send anything, not have anything documented. There's no excuse for that. If there's enough of that kind of stuff, then you're going to see the max, and that they're going to once again kind of dig in on that modifier and pulling and auditing and asking for money back. So that's kind of what, what gets me a little nervous about this and seeing this is that we still know we still have to work on documentation. We're still not there yet. A lot of them are getting better with it, and I think the new guidelines helped. So that's the other thing. If it's under the 95, 97, if they're looking at records back then you've then got those old bad habits. So I think that sometimes needs to be taken with a grain of salt when you look at that stuff too.
Absolutely. No, I really liked your thought process there. I agree with you. And this is exactly the type of work that you and I do, right? Is that proactive education, right? We still believe it, we see it, it's needed, right? And especially in today's landscape, right? There's not too much we can do from documentation from the past, from the 1995 and 1997, right? That's over. But in terms of today, I agree with you. You and I have seen our providers improve, and they have figured out and listened to us, advise them on how to, bring their thoughts down, right? They have to be able to unlock what they have up here in the mind and bring it down into that EMR to help them actually support that separate, significant service, which we know so many specialty providers, in fact, do, because they need to perform that separate evaluation and treatment and management, right, in addition to that minor surgical procedure. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. It'll be really, really interesting when they finally release this in 2024. I want to see what their findings are. You're absolutely correct. It's a shame that so many providers just let it go, or they ignore the documentation request, or they don't appeal timely, right? There's so many issues that we definitely see in terms of when they quantify in their completed reports. And I know we'll talk about this in the weeks to come in terms of how they quantify numbers, their analysis, what they're bundling stuff into their reports at the end. But for this specific one, for the modifier 25, I think it will be really applicable for all of us in terms of education and how we can continue pushing for more education to our providers to help make sure that they're doing things correctly the first time. So, yeah.
You're spot on, my friend.
Yeah. Love it. So I hope the audience today enjoyed learning much more about the OIG Work Plan. I think we gave a really good comprehensive view on what they do, why it's important, and why we should utilize it to avoid these types of compliance capers that my good friend and I talk about here in Compliance Capers from month to month. And again, we are focusing the entire month of March Madness, on the OIG Work Plan. So I can't wait for us to come back again next week.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Betty. I enjoyed us and our conversation again today.
Always do. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.